Between 1920 and 1960, Hollywood built more than 300 palatial estates across Los Angeles, each one a testament to the staggering wealth generated by the film industry. By 1980, fewer than a dozen remained. The Pickford Fairbanks estate on Summit Drive, where royalty once danced beneath crystal chandeliers, became a parking lot in 1957. Marion Davies' 110-room ocean house in Santa Monica, valued at $7 million in 1945, was demolished in 1956 after standing just 28 years. Harold Lloyd's Greenacres, with its 44 rooms and 20 acres, fell to wreckers in 1975, but one mansion survived when all the others fell, not through luck or historical designation, but through a decision so radical it seemed like betrayal at the time. The story begins in 1892, not in Hollywood but in Toronto, where a teenage girl named Mary Pickford lived in a boarding house her mother ran after her father's death. Gladys Louise Smith, as she was born, started performing at age 7 to help pay rent. She had no formal education past 5th grade, spoke with a working-class accent she spent years erasing, and possessed what theatre managers called an uncommonly shrewd business sense for someone so young. At 16, she talked Broadway producer David Belasco into casting her and suggested he change her name to something that sounded like old American money. Mary Pickford, she proposed. Belasco agreed. By 1909, Pickford was making films for D.W. Griffith at Biograph Studios, earning $40 per week. Within 3 years, she was making $500 per week. By 1916, she commanded $10,000 per week, plus a $300,000 signing bonus, equivalent to roughly $8 million today. She achieved this through tactics that shocked the genteel film industry. She studied her contracts with lawyers, refused to sign until every clause favored her, and walked away from deals when producers tried to lowball her. She understood something other actors didn't. Audiences came specifically to see her. In 1919, she co-founded United Artists with Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, controlling not just her salary, but her entire creative output and distribution. That year, at age 26, she was earning approximately $1.2 million annually in today's dollars. The problem facing wealthy Hollywood stars in the 1920s was social legitimacy. Old Los Angeles families, descendants of Spanish land grant holders and gold rush millionaires, considered film people vulgar nouveau riches, barely above carnival workers. Private clubs rejected their membership applications. Society matrons refused to attend their parties. Land developers in exclusive areas like Pasadena and San Marino wrote covenants explicitly barring theatrical persons from purchasing property. The stars were fabulously rich but socially homeless, unable to buy their way into respectability, no matter how much money they threw at the problem. Previous attempts to solve this had failed spectacularly. Charlie Chaplin bought a mansion in Los Feliz in 1922, only to find his neighbors circulating petitions demanding he leave. Gloria Swanson built a Mediterranean palace in Beverly Hills in 1924, but couldn't get invited to a single dinner party hosted by the city's established residents. Douglas Fairbanks, however, came from different stock than most Hollywood stars. Born Douglas Elton Thomas Ullman in Denver in 1883, he was the son of a Jewish immigrant lawyer who abandoned the family. His mother remarried a wealthy Southern gentleman named Edward Fairbanks, and young Douglas absorbed his stepfather's manners, accent, and social polish. Unlike Pickford, who clawed her way up from poverty, Fairbanks attended private schools and elite summer camps. He spoke 3 languages, rode horses competently, and could navigate formal dinner settings without revealing his fractured family background. While other stars flaunted their wealth with gaudy jewelry and custom Rolls-Royces, Fairbanks studied how actual aristocrats behaved. He noticed they didn't buy respectability, they created institutions. In early 1919, Fairbanks began looking for property in Beverly Hills, then a struggling development of dirt roads and scattered homes. Most lots sat empty because wealthy Angelenos preferred older, more established neighborhoods. Fairbanks saw what others missed, an entirely blank canvas where no social hierarchy yet existed. On February 4, 1919, he purchased 18 acres on Summit Drive for $35,000, equivalent to roughly $600,000 today. The land sat at the highest point in Beverly Hills, offering views from downtown Los Angeles to the Pacific Ocean. More importantly, it was far enough from old money neighborhoods that he wouldn't face restrictive covenants. He told his new wife, Mary Pickford, whom he'd married just days earlier in a secret ceremony, that they would build something unprecedented, a hunting lodge that mimicked English country estates, but functioned as a Hollywood power center. Fairbanks assembled a team that reflected his dual strategy of appearing traditional while operating radically modern. He hired Wallace Neff, a 26-year-old architect who'd studied at MIT and in Europe. Neff had designed only a handful of homes, but possessed what Fairbanks valued most: contempt for the Spanish colonial revival style dominating Southern California. Neff believed great estates should look like they'd stood for centuries, with weathered wood, aged brick, and romantic irregularity. For landscaping, Fairbanks brought in James Waldron Gillespie, a Scottish immigrant who'd designed gardens for railroad barons. Gillespie was 61, suffering from chronic arthritis, and considered too old for major projects. He accepted because Fairbanks promised him carte blanche and unlimited budget. For interiors, Fairbanks chose Harold Grieve, a set designer from his films, rather than a conventional decorator. Grieve understood theatrical impact. Neff and Gillespie immediately clashed over whether gardens should complement the architecture or dominate it. Fairbanks let them fight, then took Gillespie's side on scale and Neff's on materials. The compromise produced something neither man would have created alone. Construction began in May 1919 and immediately faced logistical nightmares. Summit Drive was unpaved. Water and electricity lines ended 3 miles away. Fairbanks spent $15,000 just extending utilities to the property. He brought in 85 workers who lived in temporary barracks on site. The main house required 500 tons of timber, most shipped from Oregon forests Fairbanks owned through his production company. He imported 40,000 antique roof tiles from a demolished monastery in Spain, paying $8,000 plus shipping. Stone for the foundations came from a quarry in Riverside, transported by truck convoys that took 3 days per trip. The total cost approached $200,000, equivalent to $3.5 million today, making it one of the most expensive private residences in California. The completed mansion sprawled across 56,000 square feet with 25 rooms, though it deliberately appeared smaller from the front approach. Neff designed it as a series of connected wings that revealed themselves gradually, creating theatrical surprise. The main house featured walls of whitewashed brick, dark wood beams, and a steeply pitched roof that suggested English Tudor styling without copying it directly. Inside, the first-floor living room measured 50 by 30 feet with a 20-foot ceiling supported by hand-hewn beams. A pipe organ, custom-built by the Los Angeles Art Organ Company, was hidden behind carved panels. The dining room sat 36 guests and featured a ceiling painted by an artist Fairbanks hired away from William Randolph Hearst's San Simeon project. Upstairs, Pickford's bedroom suite included a marble bathroom with gold-plated fixtures and a private projection room where she screened her own films to study her performances. Fairbanks's study contained a secret door leading to a staircase down to the wine cellar, which he used during Prohibition to hide his bootleggers' deliveries. The grounds were even more ambitious than the house. Gillespie created what he called a series of outdoor rooms, connected by pathways that seemed to wander randomly, but were precisely engineered for sightlines and surprise. A swimming pool, inspired by Roman baths, measured 120 feet long and featured an underwater lighting system designed by the same engineer who lit Broadway theaters. A separate building housed a gymnasium and screening room with 50 seats upholstered in velvet. Fairbanks installed a full-size tennis court, a badminton court, and what he called a sports field for football and baseball. Gillespie planted 150 full-grown oak trees, each one costing $500 to purchase and transport. He built a stable for 8 horses and a kennel for Fairbanks' hunting dogs. A staff house hidden behind hedges provided rooms for 12 live-in servants, butler, cook, assistant cook, 3 maids, 3 groundskeepers, a chauffeur, a stable master, and a night watchman. The estate, which Pickford christened Pickfair in newspaper interviews, opened for its first party on January 1, 1921. Fairbanks invited 200 guests, fellow actors, directors, studio executives, and crucially, several members of old Los Angeles families whom he'd courted through private meetings and strategic donations to their charities. The evening began with a tour of the grounds, followed by a screening of Fairbanks' latest film, then dinner and dancing until dawn. Lord Louis Mountbatten, visiting California, attended and proclaimed it the most American thing I have seen. The Los Angeles Times ran a feature calling Pickfair the new social center of the film colony. Within months, being invited to Pickfair became Hollywood's ultimate status symbol. Chaplin came every Sunday for tennis. Gloria Swanson attended Pickford's Tuesday afternoon teas. Directors and writers pitched ideas during dinner parties. But the transformation ran deeper than social success. Pickfair established a template. Hollywood could create its own aristocracy, independent of old money's approval. By 1925, Beverly Hills had been transformed from a failed development into the most expensive residential area in California, with property values tripling in 6 years. But underneath the glamour, a financial time bomb was ticking. Maintaining Pickfair cost $180,000 annually in 1930, equivalent to $3.2 million today. The staff alone required $40,000 in wages. Property taxes, as Beverly Hills incorporated and began seriously assessing estates, jumped from $2,000 in 1925 to $18,000 in 1935. Pickford and Fairbanks both saw their film incomes decline as talkies arrived and their silent film appeal faded. Pickford's last major hit was in 1929. Fairbanks made his final successful film in 1932. They divorced in 1936, with Pickford keeping Pickfair as part of the settlement. She remarried actor Buddy Rogers in 1937, but her income was now entirely from United Artists distributions, not acting fees. She privately admitted to friends that she was house poor, spending enormous sums to maintain a property that existed primarily as a symbol. What happened to other Hollywood estates makes clear how precarious Pickfair's situation truly was. Harold Lloyd's Greenacres, built in 1928 for $2 million, cost $300,000 annually to maintain. Lloyd kept it until his death in 1971, but his widow sold it immediately to a developer who subdivided the land. The mansion was demolished in 1975. John Barrymore's Bella Vista, completed in 1927 with 55 rooms on 7 acres, was sold in 1942 for unpaid taxes. The new owner demolished it and built apartment buildings. Marion Davies' Ocean House, the largest private residence in Santa Monica, with 110 rooms, required a staff of 40. After William Randolph Hearst's empire collapsed, Davies couldn't afford to keep it. She sold to a developer in 1945 for $600,000, less than a tenth of what Hearst had spent building it. It was demolished in 1956 to make way for a beach club. The pattern was identical across Los Angeles. Spectacular mansions built in the 1920s and early 1930s became economically unsustainable by the 1940s and 1950s. The problem was systemic, not personal. In 1913, the federal government introduced income tax, initially affecting only the wealthy. By 1945, top marginal rates reached 91%. Simultaneously, estate taxes rose to 77% on fortunes over $10 million. The old model of accumulating wealth, building a palace and passing it to heirs became mathematically impossible. Labor costs exploded after World War II as servants demanded higher wages and shorter hours. A butler who earned $1,500 annually in 1930 commanded $6,000 by 1950. Air conditioning, which became standard in new homes, couldn't be retrofitted into older mansions without massive expense. Property taxes kept rising as municipalities realized estates represented enormous potential revenue. Beverly Hills raised assessments 3 times between 1945 and 1955. Most devastating was the simple math of maintenance. A 50,000 square foot house required constant repairs, and handcrafted materials from the 1920s couldn't be replaced cheaply. Mary Pickford faced this crisis in 1953 when she was 61 years old. Her husband, Buddy Rogers, suggested they sell Pickfair and move to a smaller, modern house. Pickford refused. She'd lived there 34 years. Her entire identity was bound to the property. But she also recognized they couldn't continue spending $200,000 annually to maintain it. She initially tried the obvious solution, reducing staff, closing off unused wings, letting gardens return to a more natural state. It helped but wasn't enough. She sold her United Artists shares in 1956 for $3 million, using the money to pay down debts and fund emergency repairs, but that was finite capital being deployed against infinite expenses. The solution came from an unexpected source. In 1958, a young publicity agent named Russell Birdwell approached Pickford with a proposal that horrified her initially. Birdwell suggested opening Pickfair for public tours, charging admission, and positioning it as a living museum of Hollywood's golden age. Pickford's immediate reaction, according to friends, was outrage. She would not turn her home into some carnival attraction. But Birdwell persisted with a different framing: preservation through access. He pointed out that every other great Hollywood mansion was being demolished precisely because they remained private. Their only value was the land beneath them. If Pickfair became a cultural institution, it gained protection. More practically, ticket revenue could fund maintenance that was otherwise impossible. Pickford spent 6 months considering this. She visited Hearst Castle, which had opened for public tours in 1958 after Hearst's death, and saw crowds treating it with reverence rather than vulgarity. She consulted with the newly formed Los Angeles Conservancy, which encouraged her. Finally, in January 1959, she announced that Pickfair would open for guided tours 3 days per week. Tickets cost $5, equivalent to about $50 today. Tours would be limited to 20 people and would see only the ground floor public rooms, not the private quarters. A portion of proceeds would go to the Motion Picture Relief Fund, giving the enterprise a charitable shield. The public response validated Birdwell's instinct. In the first year, 18,000 people visited Pickfair, generating $90,000 in gross revenue. After expenses, Pickford netted approximately $40,000, enough to cover property taxes and staff wages. More important than money was the psychological shift. Visitors weren't gawkers, they were pilgrims. They wanted to touch the same handrails that Charlie Chaplin had touched, stand where Einstein had stood during his 1931 visit, see the piano where George Gershwin had premiered songs. Pickford received hundreds of letters thanking her for preserving history. She began to see herself not as a faded star clinging to past glory, but as a custodian of cultural heritage. The transformation affected her health and outlook. Friends noted she seemed younger, more engaged. She trained tour guides personally, insisting they tell accurate stories rather than Hollywood myths. The economic model proved sustainable, but required constant adaptation. By 1963, attendance had dropped to 12,000 annually as the novelty wore off. Pickford responded by hosting special events, charity dinners in the dining room, film screenings in the projection room, even allowing carefully vetted film productions to shoot exteriors. Each use generated revenue while increasing Pickfair's visibility. She also began selling items she'd collected during her marriage to Fairbanks: costumes, props, furniture. These sales, positioned as preserving artifacts by dispersing them to museums rather than letting them rot in storage, brought in additional funds. When Pickford died in 1979 at age 86, Buddy Rogers inherited Pickfair. He was 75 and had neither the energy nor inclination to maintain the estate. He sold it in 1980 to a sports executive named Jerry Buss for $5.4 million. Buss intended to live there but found the costs overwhelming. He sold in 1988 to actress Pia Zadora and her husband for $7 million. This sale marked the end of Pickfair as Pickford had known it. Zadora demolished most of the original structure in 1990, claiming it was earthquake-damaged beyond repair. Preservationists disputed this, suggesting the real reason was that updating the mansion to modern standards cost more than rebuilding. The demolition sparked outrage among historians and led directly to new Los Angeles ordinances protecting historically significant properties. But the model Pickford pioneered survived, even if her specific building didn't. Greystone Mansion in Beverly Hills, built in 1928 for the Doheny family, followed Pickfair's template when the family donated it to the city in 1965, with the stipulation it remain intact. It generates revenue through film shoots and events while serving as a public park. The Spadina House, the famous witch's house in Beverly Hills, remained private, but its owners accepted landmark designation in 1976, receiving tax benefits in exchange for preservation commitments. These arrangements, now common, descend directly from Pickfair's experiment with making preservation economically viable. Today, Pickfair means different things to different people. For tourists who visit Beverly Hills, it represents the vanished glamour of classical Hollywood, a time when stars were royalty and their homes were palaces. For the local community, particularly older residents who remember when Summit Drive was still recognizable as the neighborhood Pickford created, it symbolizes the loss of an era when Hollywood had romance rather than corporate calculation. For preservation scholars, Pickfair remains a cautionary tale. The original structure is gone, but the principle it established endures. For students of Hollywood history, it's the last tangible connection to united artists and the independent spirit that briefly let artists control their own work. The contrast with demolished estates is instructive. Harold Lloyd's Greenacres fell because Lloyd's heirs saw only financial burden, not cultural asset. They sold to whoever would pay the most, a developer who saw only land value. Marion Davies' Ocean House disappeared because Davies herself had come to hate the place after Hearst's humiliation and wanted it gone. John Barrymore's Bella Vista was lost because Barrymore died broke, leaving no one with resources or motivation to fight for it. In each case, the property remained private until the end, and privacy meant vulnerability. No constituency existed to demand preservation. No economic model justified maintenance. When the family decided to sell, demolition was the most profitable outcome. Pickfair survived 60 years past most comparable estates because Mary Pickford made a choice that seemed like surrender, but was actually adaptation. Where Harold Lloyd clung to complete privacy, Pickford accepted partial publicity. Where Marion Davies walked away from her mansion's history, Pickford embraced and monetized it. Where Barrymore's heirs sold to the highest bidder without conditions, Rogers sold to Buss with specific preservation requirements in the contract. The decisions sound obvious in retrospect, but were radical at the time. In the 1950s, no one opened their actual home for public tours. Hearst Castle didn't count. Hearst was dead. Pickford broke that barrier. The physical Pickfair may be gone, but stand on Summit Drive today, and you can still feel what made it significant. The street curves the same way Gillespie designed it. The views Fairbanks paid to capture remain unchanged, city lights spreading to the horizon, Pacific Ocean shimmering in the distance. The neighboring estates, many still occupied by entertainment industry figures, exist because Pickfair proved Beverly Hills could be Hollywood's permanent home. On quiet evenings, when smog clears and the city seems almost romantic, it's possible to imagine Mary Pickford standing on her terrace, surveying what she and Fairbanks built, understanding finally that their real legacy wasn't the house itself, but the idea that palaces could endure if their owners were willing to share them. The mansions that fell were guarded until death. The one that survived, even partially, was the one that opened its doors before it was too late.